jump into my project about soybeans use as a biofuel, or more specifically, a biodiesel. So some history of soybean usage is that soybean is actually a rather old crop. The first soybeans have been traced back to around China in the 11th century. And for a while, soybean was not actually harvested like wheat and corn were. They were rather foraged in the very early beginning, while people with corn and wheat immediately started harvesting it in large bundles. Um, Sources say that Americans did have access to soybeans 100 years prior to their first mention, but they had mistaken it with a plant called the Chinese vetch. And today, it's eaten with many vegan diets. It's also known as edamame. And in the biofuel industry, its oil is very important and crucial for creating energy. So, how it's cultivated, it grows in a cycle with corn. So, one year they'll plant corn, and then the next year they'll plant soybeans in order to prevent any diseases. They grow in clusters together in bundles of like two or three, and they can be grown on thousands and thousands of acres and cultivated with combines. So, how is soybean oil related to biodiesel? It reacts with sodium hydroxide, which basically breaks down soybean oil to create glycerin as the biodiesel. So in this case, the alcohol here would be the sodium hydroxide to create the glycerol and esters. Now the esters are the biodiesel mentioned up here. And it's also a fatty ester because it originally came from an oil. This whole process is called transesterification, which a fat or oil reacts with an alcohol, which the alcohol in this case is the sodium hydroxide, to create an ester and a glycerin. So another interesting thing about soybeans is that they're also known as legumes, and they have a very interesting interaction with bacteria and the nitrogen cycle. So although being sick isn't necessarily a very good thing, soybeans and the rhizoma bacteria create a really good symbiotic relationship between them, where they both provide a positive thing for each other. While here you can see like the infection is feeding off the nodule from the plant. The plant is also ending up with a lot more nitrogen. So this also helps farmers not needing to put more nutrients in the soil, like more nitrogen and things like that, and it saves on cost. So the development of status, soybeans are used globally as a biodiesel. 61% of the oilseed production in the world in 2022 was made just from soybeans. That is how detrimental they are to oilseed production. With crop area wise, 33% of crop area worldwide was used for soybeans, while corn made up 35% and a bunch of other plants made up smaller percentages of that. So it is very highly developed, and it doesn't really need any more perfecting, except for the fact that they have a pretty bad carbon footprint. The carbon footprint isn't directly it's an indirect carbon footprint for the soybeans because they chop down lots of land to create soybeans, and while they're also chopping down this land, the use of replanting in the same land over and over and over again can compact and degrade the soil and erode it of actual natural nutrients that's good for a lot of like ground animals and things like that, like worms, which worms are really good for composition and things like that. And so although it doesn't directly contribute to carbon footprint, it does indirectly, and it produces 6.44 kilograms of carbon per kilogram per year, which is a lot less than what beef produces. So it's not nearly as bad, but it's still quite a bit. So its economic impact, soybeans have brought in over $124 billion into the U.S., which is insane. By the way, that is absolutely crazy. Pardon my lack of words. It is mind-blowing that such a not so thought about plant brings in so much to our economy each year. And this is only in 2022. 4.28 billion bushels, which is like basically a handful of or not really a handful, but it's basically a handful of soybeans was sold from the US, and then half of that, all the soybeans in the world came from the US in just 2022. So there are many efforts to communicate with the public about soybean usage, but there should be more efforts talking about the side effects of using soybean from like through the soil erosion mentioned previously and the deforestation that comes from the farming. Um, but it's just not well thought about because not many people think about biofuels on the everyday, which a lot of people should because that's where a majority of literally everything we use in life come from is between biofuels or different forms of energy like that. So my personal stance, I feel like soybeans are a great idea, but a bad execution. They're good overall in not just our diet, but they're good as a biofuel because you're breaking it down basically not really synthetically, and you don't have many terrible byproducts of it, but they do indirectly harm a lot of the environment. There could be more programs put in, and my idea for this, if to prevent this, would be like there could be more programs put in place, whether it's replanting trees that are cut down or maybe healing, letting the soil heal for a couple years and culturing it back to its original environment. And overall, they're not the best, but they're also not the worst form of energy to use either. And so I have a rather neutral stance on them. And here are my citations for the presentation. Thank you very, very much for listening and watching.